Thank you. Thank you and good morning. You learned from Hiram. That was very good. Before we get started, I would like to tell you about my daughter, Annie. Annie is now 25 years old. She's going to become a veterinarian. Annie was born going 180 miles an hour, and she hadn't slowed down since. Now, when Annie was 18 months old, we went to visit the grandparents, my wife's parents. And Annie, of course, is running around this house, room to room, exploring, tearing things apart, little pigtails flopping up and down in the wind. And she comes charging in through the living room. And Grandpa's in there. Now, Grandpa's an outdoorsman. Spends a lot of time on his boat in the water, so he's very tan. He is also as bald as a cue ball. And he's sitting there in his reading chair, and he's got on these little square Ben Franklin reading glasses with a book in his lap. And Annie comes charging by 180 miles an hour, sees Grandpa sitting there in his chair, and stops dead cold in her tracks and just stares. What is that? Is the look on her face. And she stares. You know how a 2-year-old can be so inquisitive? She stares and stares. Finally, she stands up and she smiles a big old smile. Then she laughs a big old laugh. Then she looks over at Grandma and she says, "Grandma, I have a Mr. Potato Head too." Isn't it true that you or I can both look at a third person and see someone totally different? Isn't it true that I could look at you and see somebody totally different than who you think you see when you look in the mirror? And isn't it true that each one of us can look in the mirror and pretend to see somebody different than the person who's really there? And one of the biggest challenges I work with in my profession as a values coach is helping people look in the mirror and see who's really there and not pretend to see somebody else, not pretend to see less than what's really there. The Bible asks the question, who would light a candle and put a basket over it? I see it all the time. The biggest challenge many of the people that I work with is that they have taken a basket and put it over that shining bright light inside of them. They have covered up their own magnificence. And I know every single morning, my challenge when I get up on this day is going to be take the basket off and let the candle shine. Don't pretend to be somebody less than who you really are. But there's something even more important than that. More important than looking in the mirror and seeing who's really there, looking in the mirror and seeing who could be there. Who could be there looking back at me if I were really living up to my potential? Who could be there if I were being the person I'm meant to be, if I were being all that I could be? And I think that's the greatest challenge in life. Take the basket off the candle and be the person you're meant to be. And how do you do that? Our earlier speaker, Hiram Smith, commented on the power of values, and he was right on target. And I know something about you. Having traveled around the country over the past 12 years, worked with a lot of people, I know something about the members of this audience. I know that you have good, solid values. Am I right? Let's do a quick check. Please raise your hand if you do not have good, solid values. I also know this about you. I know that you probably have not put a whole lot of thought into what are those values. You probably would have a difficult time making a list. As Hiram mentioned, you probably would have a hard time deciding how would I act if I could honor one value but not the other, integrity or loyalty. Any parent who's gotten the 3 a.m. call from their kid in the jail knows that the word tough love is an oxymoron. And the time to decide, do we do the tough thing or do we do the love thing, is not 3 o'clock in the morning. If you think about those things ahead of time, you're much less likely to do or say things that you later regret. And I also know this. Most of you have not put a lot of thought into knowing what my values are. What would the proverbial man from Mars see in my attitudes and in my behaviors? And what are the actions I can take to close that gap between who I say I am, who I say I want to be, and what somebody on the outside would observe in my daily behaviors? And let's illustrate how difficult this is to do, and at the same time, the incredible potential when you make that effort. I want you to think about your values for a minute. If I were to ask you, what are your values? What are the things that really matter to you? What would be on that list? And how many of you, as you made that list, how many of you would have victimhood? That's important to you to know that you're a victim. You got the coffee mug at home that says, "Poor me." You woke up this morning and looked out the window and went, "Oh, great. Another day to be pathetic." Please raise your hand if that's you. For the record, there's not one hand up among the hundreds of people in this audience. Okay, let's do a reality check. How many of you, and be honest with me and with yourself, how many of you have complained about something in the past 48 hours? Anything at all? Raise your hand if you've complained about... Everybody! And some people, 2 hands. What are you saying when you complain? You're saying 3 things. First thing you're saying, something's bothering me, otherwise I wouldn't be wasting my time and yours whining about it. Second thing you're saying, it's not my fault. Otherwise I'd be looking in the mirror instead of pointing